Hi, welcome. I'm delighted to be with Mary Elizabeth Williams today.
Hi.
I'm here at Welsh National Opera at the Wales Millennium Centre. No pressure. A few questions, if we may, for the sprouts.co.uk, Cardiff's young person website. So, we'll crack into things. You've performed with WNO in a selection of operas. What makes you come back to Cardiff?
Well, this is my 5th contract with Welsh National, which makes me sound much older than I really am, because they've been sort of concentrated in a few years, which is good. I come back to Cardiff because I love working at Welsh National. There's the added bonus that it's in Cardiff, which is also one of my favorite cities. Welsh National is a great place to work. There are lots of reasons. The people here are wonderful, and I think that that's partially just because the theatrical world that we live in offers a certain intimacy automatically. And so people in the theater are nice to each other, are open, are fun to be around. But then also you add that there's a large component of people that are Welsh, which is really good. Because I find that Welsh people are also very open and wonderful, easy to talk to, generous, giving colleagues. This is my 2nd time working with Gwyn, for example, who is a very proud Welshman. And he's wonderful to work with. He's very generous and a good colleague, and I don't know, I just have a good time here. And I feel like this is a place where I can explore musically and artistically and have friendly faces around me when I make a fool of myself. Because occasionally, of course, when you take risks, you also make a fool of yourself.
That may lead to a later question.
Okay.
So a question which may be a little bit controversial. Keeping into the Welsh theme, do you have a favourite Welsh destination?
Well, that's difficult because I think all the places that I've been to in Wales have their, as we say in Italian, suo fascino. They have the thing about them that makes them fascinating. I remember the first time I went to, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Llandudno. Llandudno. It's difficult to pronounce. I fell in love with that little seaside. I mean, I would walk along the water all the time, at every moment. In the morning, I would wake up and want to do it. At when the sun would go down, late at night, it was always beautiful. Anyway, also, I like the Brecon Beacons National Park. I've been there several times. Of course. I think Wales is beautiful, just in general. I've also been, and I'm going to forget the name of it. What is the name of that museum where they have all of the historical buildings? It's very nearby. What is that called?
St. Albans.
Yes,
St. Albans.
I found
Historical Museum, Cultural Museum.
Yes, but it's all outside, and there's all that's beautiful. I mean, Wales is beautiful, period. So, and I live in Penarth when I'm here. Every time
the garden by the sea.
Yes,
of course.
I stay there.
Okay, thank you. Tell us more about The Force of Destiny. What can we expect from this brand new production?
Well, The Force of Destiny is a wonderful opera, but it's not done very often. I think for a few reasons. It's difficult to cast because you need really strong singers, but Welsh National has access to lots of good singers. It's also expensive because it's long, it requires a big chorus, it requires a big orchestra, so that's another reason why operas don't do it. So I'm very happy that the Verdi Syndicate has underwritten this production and given money so that we were able to do this when ordinarily it would be a very, very difficult thing for a company to undertake.
Can I ask, when you say underwritten,
yes,
can you elaborate on this?
Well, I just know that they have given funds in addition, above and beyond, and I know, for example, that there's a couple that has underwritten my involvement, and I think somebody has underwritten Gwyn's involvement. So this is a way that donors can see works that they want to see that ordinarily would be difficult to undertake, which I think is wonderful. So financially, just manpower, talent, there are lots of reasons why Forks is difficult. Also, the story is a little wackadoodle. I mean, I like the story, and it's interesting. I'm in the process now of reading the source material, actually, which is a play from the, I think, mid-1800s, if I'm not. But anyway, it doesn't. The most important thing about it is that it's sort of sprawling. It goes over a huge period of time. We travel, we're in lots of different cities, we're in war, we're in a manor house. It's crazy. And so it just becomes very difficult from a scenic perspective to capture all of that. And I think David Pountney's done a great job because he's managed to give us scenes that capture the fact that we're moving all over Spain, but and all over different kinds of emotional situations, intimate scenes between a father and a daughter, and then all of a sudden you're in this war scene with lots of soldiers, and he does a great job of juxtaposing that so that it makes sense for the audience, which I'm really grateful for. He also, in typical David Pountney style, I've never worked with David Pountney, but I've seen a lot of his work, and I really appreciate him because he finds ways to carry symbols or themes through the whole piece. And one of the things that he's doing in this piece is that he's made the role of Prezzozzilla. She has become sort of the personality of fate. She is the character that stands in for destiny. And so she is, even though she's not necessarily in every scene or written to sing in every scene, she is in most scenes in this because she is sort of making all of this happen. The thing that is wonderful about this story is basically everybody comes in from the beginning. I love this man that I'm not supposed to love, and I know that's not a good idea, but I can't help myself, like as happens in real life. And my father knows that I love this man and is trying to keep me from making what he believes is a huge mistake by running away from him, with him. And my lover wants to somehow figure out a way to have me and also not ruin my reputation. It's a mess. It starts out a mess and it finishes a mess. And the thing that drives it is not any particular decision that we make as characters. It's truly destiny. It's these crazy things that happen to us along the way that propel us to continue on a road that we didn't choose. And I think it's very interesting. And I'm enjoying exploring it. And this is a great piece because it's so sprawling and there's so many people in it. I'm only a very small part of the show. I mean, I have a lot to sing, but there's a lot more beyond my love story with the tenor that happens, and of course the tragedy of losing my father. Do you know the story of...
I don't.
Okay.
It's one of the few really old
So basically, I'll say it briefly. Basically...
No spoilers, no spoilers.
Well, I love the tenor, Don Alvaro. He is not acceptable to my family because I am highborn and he's a foreigner. Has Inca blood, Mexican native blood, and my father is very much against me getting involved with him. So he has stolen me and taken me to the country to separate me from this guy and hopefully get him off of my mind. And he's gonna marry me off to someone else, he hopes, eventually. And Don Alvaro and I come up with a plan that we're going to flee together. We're going to elope. We're going to run off, and I'm going to leave everything I know and leave this comfortable existence I have to be with him. And in the process of doing that, of course, I am very already not sure that that's what I want to do, but I do love him, and I know that's the only way. And so already I'm coming into this with reservations. And in the middle of fleeing, of course, my father comes in and catches us. And I try to get in the middle of them, try to get them to talk reasonably, but they are not talking reasonably. Finally, my boyfriend, Don Alvaro, says, listen, your daughter is completely pure. Nothing has happened. I relinquish all rights and here. And he throws his gun on the floor. And in the process of throwing the gun on the floor, it goes off and hits my father and kills him. And as my father is dying, this is the very first scene. As my father is dying, he says to me and to Don Alvaro, I curse both of you.
It's a happy start.
Yeah, it's a happy start. See,
it's
that's kind of where we start, and it never...
It's a delightful way to be thrown into a 3 hour.
But there's all kinds of other stuff that happens that I don't need to tell you about. But basically, that is the driving motor of this, is that in the course of doing something that could have, I mean, it was already kind of dangerous, but it could have turned out better.
Yeah.
A huge mistake happens that throws everything into disorder, because then, of course, my brother is duty-bound to find both of us and kill us. Because, you know, as killing the patriarch of the family, I've disgraced the family, Don Alvaro has ruined the honor of the family, and the only way out of it is to kill us both.
This isn't a question I actually planned. It might be a little bit. Do you believe in destiny? Felt appropriate to throw that in.
Well, I would say the general answer to that question is yes. In my darker moments, when I'm contemplating what the hell I'm doing in this career, for example, sometimes I think, you know, there must not be destiny. But I think my meta answer is yes, I believe in destiny. I believe in the sort of musical, my father used to call it the music of the spheres. I believe that in the grand sense, there must be some rhythm that we maybe don't understand. But I also, especially at times like these, when there's so much suffering, it's difficult for me to reconcile the idea that everything has a purpose when so many people seem to suffer purposelessly. Is that a word? Purposelessly. So I don't know. But then things do work out, or things move in a direction that you could not have ever imagined, sort of despite all the things that we try to do. And then I say, well, maybe there is something, there's some grand plan. So I guess I'm of two minds.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for answering that. We haven't actually planned to say that. You're also returning to perform Tosca. What makes her such a fascinating role?
Well, I'm not actually returning. I'm like staying. I'm doing it simultaneously. Actually, thank goodness, Welsh National has not asked me to rehearse two things at the same time, because I don't think that I would be able to keep it all in my head. But as soon as we open Forza, I will begin rehearsing for Tosca. And I've already done Tosca here. I did it in, I think, 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And this is the same production, but of course every time you do a production and you have different characters, different people playing the characters, you have to change it. It becomes different, even if it's the same costume, the same set. And so I'm very much looking forward. Tosca, what does it mean to me?
Yes, essentially, yes.
Well, I have always believed that the story of Tosca, unlike Forza del Destino, is one of the clearest, easiest to follow, precisest dramaturgical lines in opera. And I think it's a wonderful beginning opera for people that have never been to opera. So for all of my friends out there that have never been to opera and are interested in coming, don't go to Forza first. Go to Tosca first. Come to Forza too, but maybe you should email me afterwards if you have questions, because you probably will. But Tosca is great because it's three perfect acts. Each act is shorter than the one before. It happens in the space of about 12 hours. All of the action, even less probably, actually, now that I think about it. And so it's very immediate. And it's so it's easier to digest as a audience member, and I think it's easier to handle dramaturgically as a performer. And musically, it's wonderful. I mean, Puccini. I personally prefer Verdi to Puccini to sing. However,
controversial, but no.
Well, I mean, I understand why people love to listen to Puccini, but I think Verdi wrote better for the voice.
Okay.
Puccini, I think, wrote better for audiences. So
Interesting.
There's much. He had a much more, what I would call, cinematographic, or there's something like a movie score sometimes about
I feel
how he
like
writes.
Tosca, it has the cinematic sort of punch that is as not as well. It's as long as a film. It doesn't exceed most opera lengths, and it's got that accessibility, like an action thriller.
Yes,
Tosca is
exactly.
beautiful.
Exactly.
Another quick question: are you ready for your leap from the in Rome?
I actually am afraid of heights. It's a strange thing. So, my husband always makes fun of me because I have trouble, like, getting on a ladder at home. Right. Like, if I need to get something, I always make him do it. And he always says to me, you jump off of buildings on stage on a regular basis. And I say, but it's true. When I'm on stage, I'm willing to do things that I don't do in my normal life at all. So, for the character, somehow it's easier for me to jump off of the back of the set, and I don't think about it. But if I'm Mary Elizabeth, just, at home, and you ask me to go up even 3 steps on a ladder, I start to get a little punchy. So yes, I'm ready because it's my job, basically.
How do you prepare before a performance? Do you have any rituals or interesting warm-ups?
Well, I think basically my whole life is a warm-up to be on stage, for better or for worse. People say that your voice becomes your child, or a responsibility, and that's how I feel. I mean, when I pick what I'm going to eat, for example, I think about if it's going to be okay, if it's going to give me acid reflux, if I am going to be able to sing the next morning. When I want to go out and have a good time with my friends and drink, I always pick what I drink according to how it's going to affect my voice. When I think about sleeping or waking up, it's about, do I have enough time to warm up and do what I need to do to, that's pretty much all I do, is sort of calculate around rehearsals and performances, which is part of the job. That's part of what makes you an artist. On the actual day of singing, typically I try to sleep late, but not too late. So, 10:30 or 11 max. And then I get up and I usually try to, warm up physically. I go for a walk, or if it's too nasty out, I can do stretching inside. Nothing crazy, but just to sort of get everything working. Because I found that warming my voice up takes less time if I'm physically warm, if my whole body's warm. Because really, you use your whole body to sing. Even though we're always thinking about just this part, it's actually your whole body that has to be involved. It's very athletic. I usually try to eat lean protein, lots of vegetables. Of course, I don't drink any alcohol on the day of the performance, or the day before, or the day after.
No brandy?
No, unless I'm sick. If I'm sick, then if I'm trying to sort of work through something, then maybe I'll make myself a hot toddy or something the evening before with rum and honey and that kind of stuff. But in general, I stay away from alcohol around performances because it's bad for it dehydrates you.
Okay.
Then I go into the theater, and usually when I bring my stuff to the theater, I always bring snacks because I don't like to eat a big meal the day of a performance. I like to sort of graze because I don't want to ever feel full. I want to always feel comfortable but not full. And so when you're working, that's often difficult because you're either full or empty. So I always have to eat a little bit. So I bring fruit and nuts and, that kind of stuff to the theater. And I usually do have a thing where I bring a small votive candle and I light a candle. And I let it burn for the entire... No, just a little candle. But it's actually not legal here. So I found
naughty.
I did it once, and somebody told on me, and they came and took it out of my dressing room. So then, instead, I found actually an online place called gratefulness.org where I can light a candle online.
Fantastic.
So that's what I do when I'm at Welsh National.
The next best thing. Cool.
But it's important. I do have little rituals, yes. Little things like that I do.
Okay. A little bit of a controversial question, but what has been the biggest accident / mistake in a production that you or a colleague have encountered?
I will be honest that you gave me a head start with this question, and you told me a few minutes ago you were going to ask me this question to give me time to think about it. And it's hard to think about something that is a big mistake because usually I've sort of processed it over time as just being something funny. Like, I don't really think about anything as being, oh my God, that was so awful that happened. Like, once I was on stage and I was singing in France. It was early in my career. And so I was singing in a theater that was very nice, good people, but the costume department, let's say, was not professional. And they made me a nightgown that I had to wear on stage that it was very tight, let's just say. It was tight here. And the whole idea was that they wanted it to look like a real nightgown. So that was fine. But then they used a zipper on the side that was plastic. And about halfway through the opera, I had it on, and of course I was working hard, and so I was warm. And the plastic started to soften. And the side zipper just sort of went open. Just opened. And of course I didn't have anything else on underneath it. Right. And so I had to sing my whole aria like this to keep my flesh from showing. That was pretty, at the time it was pretty upsetting. But now, however many years later, I just sort of think, oh, that was funny. I survived. And I remember that when I got off the stage director met me at the wing, and he said, why didn't you do any of the staging? And I said, and I just lifted my arm, and he said, oh, and he said, good job. He was so impressed that I managed not to flash the entire audience. So that was a big one. I'm trying to think if there's any. No, I've been relatively lucky. I don't, or maybe I'm just shameless. I don't really know. That's probably the worst one.
It's an excellent story. I like it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. What advice do you have for young singers who are keen to develop careers in opera?
Get a patron? No. That's... I think in this career, just in general, right now, in this life, in this world that we're living in, you need to have a lot of patience and a lot of faith in yourself. This is an ever-changing market. Opera, I think, just like the whole world, is changing so quickly. There are things that we take for granted now that 5 years ago we didn't even have. And I was just talking to my husband yesterday about the fact that in Pittsburgh, they are now having driverless Uber. Uber cars where there's no driver. You just get in and it just drives. And my friends that are working at Pittsburgh Opera talk about how weird that is. But then after a couple of weeks, they just get used to it and it's not a big deal. And so in the world in general, there's just this incredible turnover of new and exciting technology and, opportunities to communicate via the internet, or it's just overwhelming. And all of that, of course, changes the arts. It's directly affecting the arts. And so what is normal now may be completely archaic in 5 years, and what we haven't even thought of yet may be the norm in 5 years. And that, I think, requires flexibility in artists. We have to be really flexible, and we have to be really certain of what it is that we want to say with our voices, so that we, no matter what's happening in the force of destiny, in this wave of life that is happening around us, that we can hold on to our own artistic vision, what we want to say within the construct of the crazy chaos that's going on around us. And I think that, honestly, that's my advice to humankind. And I'm struggling with it myself. I think any practical advice for singers is wasted, because by the time singers that are in school are ready to have a career, all of my experiences will be obsolete. I mean, that was true when I was in school. All of the people that came to give master classes to me that were 20 years older than me gave me advice that I later found out was not applicable most of the time. I mean, I'm talking about the things like, you must always wear pantyhose and a dress to every audition, this kind of thing. All of the practical advice that they gave me was out of date. And so I go into this as someone that's a little further ahead. My feeling is I'm out of date, right? My experiences are out of date. And so the only thing I can say to you is stay flexible, figure out what you want to say, and make sure that nobody gets in your way to say it.
Yeah, I do agree. What is your guilty pleasure in life?
Oh my God.
I threw that in last night into the list of questions.
Well, I live in Italy. I have an Italian husband. I would say that my guilty pleasure is I like food. I'm working on that. I've recently been on a diet, and I've lost quite a bit of weight, which is good. And I'm trying to figure out how to still enjoy food while also not overdoing. Because living in Italy is a major problem for people that like food, because I'm surrounded by fantastic food at all times. So wine, pasta, and cheese, and meat, and fish, everything, and sweets. It's awful. I mean, it's awful and wonderful at the same time. And I have to say, Cardiff is no slouch either. I eat pretty well here too. But I'm trying to learn how to take smaller portions and really enjoy what I pick and not eat stuff that I'm not really into, so I don't waste any calories in my day. So yeah, food is a big guilty pleasure. I like, most people, I like Netflix and chill evenings. My husband and I had one of those last night where we binge watched Peaky Blinders. I've always liked the movies and Netflix and all that stuff, going out to the movies. I like drama. I like being in drama on stage in opera, and I like watching drama. I guess my problem is I have lots of pleasures, but I don't feel guilty about any of them. Eating is probably the only one that I feel guilty about.
Cool. And of course, are you ready for the zombie apocalypse?
The zombie apocalypse.
We always ask this at the Sprout. It's kind of our own little meme.
But hasn't it already happened? I thought that's what this was. I most of the time I feel like we're in the zombie apocalypse.
How so? Would you mind elaborating?
I don't know. I think it's, I'm American, and living right now as an American with Trump as president is kind of like the zombie apocalypse. Especially living as a mixed race, expat, multifaceted, as far as my heritage is concerned, and then also being married to someone of another country. So having a very open-minded sort of cosmopolitan view about the world, and then hailing from a country that has chosen Trump as
Yes.
a leader, that is for me the zombie apocalypse. And I know a lot of friends that are from the UK that have similar feelings about Brexit at the moment, for better or for worse.
Yes.
Whether it turns out to be a good thing or a bad thing, the fact that it is happening and that it's so surprising to a lot of people, I feel it's sort of, it's like we're living in times where everything's topsy-turvy. So that's what I mean about the zombie.
We are in the zombie apocalypse.
Yes, it's happened.
Cool.
It's happened. Welcome.